This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast with Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board here, and really glad you're joining us. Do take a few moments, if you can, subscribe to our channel. Definitely reach out to us on Facebook with our podcast area, our little private group there. We've got lots of people there that'll share ideas and talk and discuss things, all things Pest Geek, as well as how to run your business better, answering technical questions, and sometimes just showing off your latest triumph or maybe bemoaning your greatest defeat. So we're glad to have you on. We'd love to have you join us and be part of the process there in the discussion that we have in our industry. So take a few moments, if you would, drop me a line at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, comments, suggestions for future shows, even criticisms. Yes, we'll take those as well. If you're interested in being on the show, perhaps being a guest, maybe you have something that you've produced or you want to talk about, something that's just on your mind, definitely reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Hey, couple of things though, if you're doing that, make sure you pitch it in a way that shows how you're going to help pest control operators and wildlife control operators in the industry. Try not to just simply make it a generic blast. I just got an email recently from someone who was just sort of scatter blasting. I think he would just probably got a hold of a list of podcast owners and just sending it out. That's not really where we're at. Try to pitch it directly, show at least a little bit of knowledge of what we do here. Okay, well, now that the intros are out of the way here, so let's talk a little bit to today's subject that I wanted to speak on, which was certifications. What exactly are certifications? Well, certifications are essentially designations that show or prove or demonstrate that you have achieved, or the individual who's certified has achieved a fundamental basic level of knowledge, that they have demonstrated knowledge or a skill or both in a particular field of study or work. So certifications are often different than degrees. Degrees tend to be granted by educational institutions, and there's an accrediting process for that, where basically you have academics looking at other academics and saying, is your work sufficient? Are these requirements rigorous enough for us to say that this degree actually means something? Well, the same way with certifications. Certifications tend to be industry-based. That is, where you have industry personnel, whether you are a teacher or a nurse, or in our case, a pest control operator or a wildlife control operator, that there are industry-based certifications where it says if you pass the requirements for our certification, you have achieved a certain level of expertise that can be used as a way of differentiating yourself from those who do not have it. So typically when I talk to people sort of in my day job, and we explain to them sometimes certifications, is that it helps differentiate from a person who doesn't have a certification and one who does. Typically speaking, I mean, not always, of course, people that are certified are more dedicated to an industry than those who aren't. Now, are there exceptions? Absolutely, right? Certifications are not a divine approval mechanism, all right? So let's be frank about that. There are lots of people who don't have certifications from the industry
who are outstanding wildlife control operators and who are outstanding pest control operators, right? The problem is that a customer doesn't know how to separate a good pest control operator from a bad pest control operator. How do they distinguish those two things? It's like going to a doctor. How do you know that this Dr. A is better than Dr. B? How do you know that? Well, you can look on the wall and ask him, are you board certified? But board certification just means that they passed a test. Now, it's a pretty rigorous test, but does that really make this doctor a better doctor, or does it make this person a better student? Let me give an illustration of this. So I had some neck surgery in the past, and I talked to my doctor and I said, you know what, you're not board certified. And he said, you're right, I'm not. And I said, well, why? He says, well, because the certification for the neck also includes knowledge you have to have about brains. And he says, I don't perform surgery on brain. I don't do any brain surgery whatsoever. My only work is I work with the neck. So what happens is when he was taking the test, he said, and I only have his word for it, right? But I don't see any reason why he would lie about this, right? So I think he's being honest. Is he said that he always failed to the portion on the brain side of things because he didn't do any brain surgery, right? So his focus was on the neck. So he wasn't board certified as a spinal surgeon because it included the brain, and he didn't do brain surgery. He only did the spine. So I thought, well, that's reasonable. But here's the other thing, is that when I talked to my wife as a nurse, and she knew other nurses and was able to, obviously there's the backstory. And it turned out that this doctor had a good reputation in the area on doing neck surgery, and that he was well liked. And nurses are going to know, right? They know that when a person's coming into the operating room and if things are going wrong, they're going to know about it, right? So if good surgeons are known to be good surgeons because they have lower rates of bad events. Now, no surgeon's perfect, all right? But the good surgeons, those bad events are smaller than those that aren't as good, because no surgeon can be perfect because every body is different. Sometimes the surgeon didn't do anything wrong. It's just that person, we're all individuals, right? So sometimes that person just something happened, right? And so we have to distinguish between malpractice and maloccurrence. They're not identical. Nevertheless, and so this individual had a good reputation, wasn't certified, but had a good reputation. And also, he had admitting privileges in multiple hospitals, which is another clue. If you're a bad doctor, you can't get admitting privileges in multiple hospitals because they don't want a bad doctor around. Okay. So anyways, my surgery went fine. All right. So my point is that certification isn't the end all and be all. However, it's not meaningless. Sometimes people that don't have certifications just say, oh, it's just a piece of paper, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not fair either. But from the customer's side of things, how do they distinguish between, company A and company B, or technician A and technician B? By and large, someone who has a certification has at least dedicated themselves enough to their field of study and to their work to say, I'm going to commit myself to achieve this level of status. And that does mean something, because it means at least it shows a level of attention and care and dedication. I think we would all agree that if you're passionate about your work, at the very least, you are going to be committed to trying to do well. Now, you may not succeed, but no one's going to criticize you for maybe a lack of effort, because we also know people that are very skilled and who are just lazy. All right. So certifications, just to kind of recap here. So we have degrees, and those are granted by educational institutions. We're not talking about degrees here. But then certifications are granted by industries to sort of help people distinguish between the professional and the hobbyist. Maybe the professional, and the hack, or someone who's just playing with it, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's certified is automatically better than someone who isn't. But by the same token, it doesn't mean that the person who's certified is a piece of garbage either. That's not true. I mean, certainly someone who's certified shows that they've dedicated themselves to at least undergo the rigor of getting certified. All right. So I hope we would all agree that certifications on an industry basis are valuable in that they do help raise the bar a little bit to try to give people some recognition for saying, yes, you've gone a little extra and you have demonstrated knowledge and skill in a particular area. And I think that's valuable for the industry. You show that you've achieved this. It's sort of like basic training for the military, right? If you pass basic training, you have achieved a certification in a sense, right? You are now a full-fledged member of that military unit. Certainly for organizations like the Marines, it's a very big deal to pass basic, okay? All right. So now the question is how do we determine the value or the quality of that certification? Because in the bottom line is that the certification is only as meaningful as the criteria and rules judged for that certification. For example, if you're trying to get a degree and the degree institution you're going to says, you don't even need to show up, sign your name on this line and send us $50 and we'll send you back a degree. Now, it may say, Stephen Vantassel has, XYZ degree from Garbage University. And I can say, yep, I have a degree. And everyone's going to say, yeah, Stephen, but it doesn't mean anything. It's a piece of garbage, right? You paid $50 and signed your name and you got a degree. So how do we judge the value of certifications? Who decides what the standard is? And that's an important question. All right, so let's talk about how certifications come about. Well, there's a variety of ways. The first way is that you would have what's called an in-house certification. That is, there are some organizations that certify their own people. I knew of a particular business that when they hired people, they had their own training mechanism and they had their own testing mechanism. And when the worker fulfilled certain criteria, they became quote unquote certified in that particular activity. That was an internal, that was to their business and business alone. You as an outsider to that business couldn't go in there and get their certification. Now, is there a value in that? Well, there is value in that in the sense that if you're, it means for your company that that the worker has at least achieved this basic level of knowledge. And if they're a pest control operator, for example, in some states, if you are the license holder and you want to have unlicensed workers below you, you are obligated to demonstrate that you have trained them. And certainly if you certify them, they're not certified by the state, then you've shown that, yes, they've achieved a certain level of knowledge and that would fulfill the state requirement. Okay. So the problem is for a customer, how do they know what that certification is if it's meaningful? Because those standards are not public. Those standards are internal to your company. So that's the internal certification process. The second way of certifying is utilizing a industry association. For example, the Entomological Society of America, the ESA, they have a certification called the BCE, Board Certified Entomologist, and the ACE, Associate Certified Entomologist. That is a industry trade association of entomologists, and you can become certified through them. And of course, people in pest control you'll often see their names. They'll have their name and then BCE, meaning they're a board certified entomologist, or ACE, which is an associate certified entomologist. And the ACEs, associate certified entomologists, are people that tend to be technicians, field workers, the people out in the field getting the job done. BCEs tend to be people who have a degree in entomology, but they're working as the technical advisor for larger corporations, and sometimes they have that technical advisory role, and they still do field work as in. But there is a hierarchy, right? The ACE is here, and the BCE is up here, right? So a BCE is a higher level of certification than someone who has an ACE. Now, the ACE certification is valuable because you had to go through a rather... I did a podcast on this earlier. It's a pretty rigorous, I would sometimes say arcane, testing process, right? It was quite stressful for me to go through that. I am not a bug guy. I'm trying to learn bugs, but I wanted to do that because I was hoping it would help me in my career, right? Or lack of it, whatever, but it's another story. And so... It was a remarkable achievement, but I worked my butt off for it. Those of you that are working with the insect world and pesticides on a more regular basis, I would suspect would have an easier or greater familiarity with a lot of the things that I had to learn de novo. But that's an industry standard based on a trade association called the Entomological Society of America. The National Wildlife Control Operators Association as well, they have certifications as well. One of them is a certified wildlife control professional. They also certify people as a wildlife control operator training course is one of their certifications. And that is an industry association, and they have a certification. Now, the difference between the ESA and NUCOA is that the ESA doesn't restrict training to be in-house in order to qualify. NUCOA does. For example, if you want to become a certified wildlife control operator in NUCOA, you have to take a NUCOA course. With the ESA, you just have to pass their test. Whatever prep course you take doesn't matter. You can take anyone's prep class. Like I took one prep class, and God bless her, she saved my life. But she was not an official ESA course, right? So you didn't have to take an ESA course to prep for the ACE exam. In NUCOA, you have to take their training and then pass their test in order to become certified. So those are two different models. Likewise, with my wife, my wife has to get continuing ed units to maintain her qualifications. However, the association that she's connected with isn't the one creating the content, the training. They just certify the content. So I put this out here to the audience, and that is, which model do you think is better? Is it better for an association, an industry trade association? Is it better for them to simply create the standard and then allow other people to perform the training to help people meet the standard, or should the association create the training and the standard that you have to go through? Let me repeat that again because I want to be sure that's clear. Remember, the ESA model is they create the standard. How you train to meet the standard is other people's problems. NUCOA says, we want you to be certified. We want you to reach the standard. However, you have to take our training and pass our test. The ESA says you just have to pass our test. What it took for you to get to the test is a separate question, but you have to pass our test. The training is separate from the test. Where in NUCOA, you have to have the training and the test. Which is a better model? You may say, well, Stephen, who cares? Why do we care about this? Well, the question is in terms of options. With the ESA, you have a variety of outlets to obtain the training necessary to prep you for those exams. With NUCOA, it's captured. You have to go through NUCOA to get the training and to take the test. So your options are limited. So with the ESA, you have competition between educators, which thereby gives you a wider variety of probably prices and availability. Where with NUCOA, you have to wait on their schedule to take their training so that you can also take their test. Two separate models. And my question for you as industry people, do you think that one model is better than another? Are they equal? Does it matter? Think about it as well. If your state, many states require that you have to get continuing education credits to maintain your pesticide license, right? So here in Montana, you have to get, for a commercial applicator, you have to get 12 credit hours every 3 years, I believe, every 3 years in order to maintain your certification. Where you get that training from is up to you. The state offers some training. Other companies offer training. And you have a variety of options to get that training. You don't have to go through the state of Montana, for instance. Now, you have states like Minnesota, I understand, that in order to maintain your license, it's a captured training. You must go through Minnesota training, and usually that's done like in a couple of days. Everyone has to come together, shut their businesses down, and get the training once a year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Drop me an email. But nevertheless, you get the idea. So the question is, which model would you prefer? Would you rather have a captured training model like Minnesota, or would you rather have an open training model like Montana, where Montana says if the training meets our approval, so we are the certifying agency in the Department of Ag, our department will say your training meets the standard, and therefore that's that. Someone else can take your training and meet our criteria for those 12 credit hours. Where in Minnesota, you have to go through their training in order to meet the standard. So your options are automatically limited. Now, I know what my opinion is because I'm an educator. Obviously, I can't provide training for Minnesota because Minnesota captures its training. Now, you may say, well, Stephen, I saw a video of you in Minnesota. Yes, that's only because I was contracted by Minnesota to provide a training, and I'm very grateful for that. But I couldn't do that on my own if I wasn't invited to do that, right? But I still had, that's the only way I was able to do that. Where here in Montana, I can create a training and submit it to our department and have it approved if it meets the criteria, and offer that training to the state. There's nothing unusual about it. It's very objective, and it's relatively straightforward. Other states, it's not. Which standard do you think is better? Is it better for an association to certify other people's training and therefore have more diversity, more options, maybe even a little competition? Or is it better for an association to simply own or control the training and the certification all at the same time? So I just want to throw that out to you folks. Again, I know what my opinion is. I believe that associations are better for certifying other people's training rather than being the exclusive holders of training. That would be my preference. But again, I'm biased, right? But again, people say, well, you're biased. Yes, other people are biased too, because you would have to ask the question, to what advantage, why is the association feeling a need to control both the training and the testing as well? Where other organizations like my wife's nursing, like my wife's associations, they don't have to control the training. They just certify the courses. They don't have to produce the courses. Now, in fairness, the wildlife control industry is quite small. It's growing, of course, but it'll always be a tenth of the size of the pest control industry, so the options are certainly limited. We also lack the government oversight that's characteristic of the pest control industry. So those are fair criticisms, because perhaps, at least in the early years, NUCOA had to create its own training because there really wasn't anything else out there by and large. Not completely, I mean, I'm being a little generic there, but you get the point, right? It's not like there's scores of companies out there creating wildlife control training, right? So in that regard, the NUCOA had to kind of fill that void to try to create something for the industry. And there is an advantage, of course, when you have a national organization. You can get a variety of perspectives. But let me push back on that a little bit. So those are positives. I'm here in Montana. I want to learn more about insects. We have very few trainings here in Montana related to insects. Where if I went to the South, we would have a lot more insect training because insects are all over the place. However, if we had a national association giving the training for insects, it would be dominated by southern insects. How would that help me learning about insects that don't even occur within the state of Montana? So you can see, by having an organization that certifies education in general rather than controlling the education, we have greater options to get some of the training that I would need, because I'd have more training options. So my opinion is, I think it's better for organizations to be certifying agents rather than educational producers. I think if we had education producers out there, and then the association acts as oversight to say, all right, does your education meet our industry standard? If it does, then you get the stamp of approval and people can take that class and it be recognized by the national organization. Maybe that takes too much paperwork. Maybe that's a problem, of course. But it's just simply my opinion. But I want you as a wildlife control operator, you as a pest control professional, to be thinking about that. What does certification mean? And I certainly want to encourage everyone out there that if you're serious about your work in wildlife control or pest control, I'm going to encourage you to get certifications. I think they're valuable, whether they're captured by an association or not, right? So Truth in Advertising, I'm certified by both the ESA and NUCOA. So I have a foot in both worlds here. And I think those certifications are valuable and they're meaningful. And it kind of saddens me that more, particularly in the wildlife control field, because I'm more familiar with that more wildlife control operators don't take the time to become certified. And I know some that are exceptional people, but they just didn't want to go get certified, and that's kind of sad to me because they certainly should be able to pass it without much trouble. Well, I hope that's something a little for you to think about. We're dealing with the professional side, but I want to encourage you to get your certifications, and I want you to market those certifications because I think they do help customers differentiate between Company A and Company B, Technician A and Technician B. And I do think they also help raise the level of professionalism within our industry. And in wildlife control, we definitely need that. We're getting better, without a doubt. And NUCOA certainly has done a lot of work in this regard to help raise industry standards. There's a lot more to go, but they've certainly been a force for good in this particular area. And I want to encourage people to obtain certifications and try to improve our industry across the board in the service that we provide customers. All right, well, it's talked a little about certification today. Want you to think about it, certainly about and how it's structured, because some of you in various states, if you need to develop a state association, you may be thinking about, are there ways to create a state certification over and above what your state requires already as a way to help people distinguish themselves from other businesses? And that is good for customers and it's good for businesses as well. And so this is something that is important that we need to think about. National standards are important, but I think we need to also be thinking about state certifications. So I just want to put that out there. I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife podcast as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Hey, take a few moments, drop me a line at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Comments, criticisms, suggestions for new shows. Do join us again on Facebook with our Pest Geek podcast family in there. It's a closed group. We have hundreds of individuals that are there and sharing ideas and things of that nature, so do join us. And remember, this is Living the Wildlife. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.